Let me just introduce myself. I'm B.D. Griffin. I'm the Assistant County Attorney for Montgomery County. I'm Chief of the Real Property Section. J.D. Lambright's the County Attorney back there. I've known J.D. for a while. I joined the office when he came in on January 1. I am board certified in commercial and residential real estate law and have been for almost 16 years now. I'm practicing law in Montgomery County for almost 30. I was asked to talk a little bit about what I call the Camp Strake Development Agreement, which is an agreement that the county reached with Johnson Development to help develop the Camp Strake property, the Boy Scout camp there on the South Loop near Conroe. And so I'm going to try and give you an overview of it briefly, and then I'll try and answer any questions. So this is basically an overview of it. It says an overview of Chapter 381 Development Agreement between Montgomery County and Conroe Municipal Management District Number 1, which has not yet been formed yet, with Johnson Development signed on behalf of them. Now, what's a Chapter 381 Development Agreement? We're talking about what we call a tax increment finance. Chapter 381 provides a mechanism to allow counties to encourage economic development. And one of the key things about this is that it does not incur any debt under the Constitution of the State of Texas. The cornerstone of these types of agreements is the county's obligations are funded completely from an increase in the ad valorem tax revenue within a given area. And that's an increase over a base year. The other main component of this is that the developer, or the district, usually the developer first, constructs the actual improvements out of their own pocket, using their own financing, and then through the tax increment financing, or through the increase in taxes, they're repaid a portion of that. And you'll kind of see how it works here. Let's talk about the Camp Strake property in and of itself, because one of the reasons I think the county entered into this was because it's kind of a unique piece of property. It contains 2,083 total acres, but only 730 acres of it are developable. And here's the breakdown of what the development will ultimately propose look like. Local lakes, recreation parks, channels, and roadways of 150 acres. Regional parkland, green space, and floodplain of 1,200 acres. Proposed residential of 410 acres. Proposed flex use of 100 acres. Proposed mixed use of commercial, retail, office, multifamily of 223 acres. The driving force behind these agreements is the cost of infrastructure. When we talk about infrastructure, we're talking about roads, bridges, wetlands remediation, the water and sewer, things such as that. And for this project, the developer estimated that the infrastructure cost is going to be $115 million to develop 730 acres. And looking at what the county was basically asked to participate in, the roads and bridges, and just a major thoroughfare and major and minor collector roads, the estimated total cost for those roads was $33,188,000. That doesn't include the water and sewer. That does not include the water and sewer in connection with those roads. Now again, as I said before, the developer pays for all these costs up front, and they get reimbursed after each phase is done. So they had a projected $115 million infrastructure cost, and they asked for and here's how they allocated it to the municipal utility district, municipal management district, a little over $75 million. That left about $40 million in projected cost that they weren't going to be covered by the municipal management district. Let me digress. What's the municipal management district? It's a mud on steroids. Okay? It's a very large mud within a municipality, within the city limits. They, again, tax the property within their district. And this budget district is going to be the 2,083 acres. They can issue bonds to incur debt to do infrastructure. So the municipal management district has an estimated ability to basically issue $75 million worth of bonds, which they then use to pay back the developer for certain infrastructure debt. Well, you see, the developer is still coming up $40 million short of the public infrastructure, what they call public infrastructure. So they came to the City of Conroe, to Montgomery County, asking them to split that cost because it's public infrastructure. So, and the city did a completely different deal than the county. I'll go through the cities in a little bit, but let me talk briefly about the counties. What is Montgomery County actually obligated? So I think that's what you're here for. That's what you want to know about. What is Montgomery County on the hook for, and how are they on the hook for? Number one is Montgomery County is obligated just to reimburse. It will technically be the municipal management district with the developer, the lesser of the actual cost of construction of certain identified roads and bridges, or 20 million, whichever is less. So it's the actual cost. Frankly, we believe it will be significantly less than 20 million because we've looked at their estimates. There's a 15% contingency fee in their estimates, or 15% contingency in their estimates. We believe their bridge cost is a little high based upon what our engineers tell us. And, you know, we believe it will probably come out somewhere in the range of 16 to 18 million rather than 20. So we capped the obligation at 20. And notice I use the word obligation. Don't use the word debt because it's not a debt. So we have this obligation that if the developer puts this infrastructure on the ground, these identified major thoroughfares, major collectors, minor collectors, I think there are 4 or 5 bridges involved in that. If they put it on the ground, we will reimburse them the actual cost over a period of years. Well, how are we going to do that? And this is where it's a little bit harder to follow. We reimburse them out of what we call the tax increment. You have a base year of taxes that the county gets 100% of. Assuming this development increases the tax basis, the taxable value and the taxes within that district, this is just this 2,000 acres as well, so they get a portion, just a portion of that increase. How we determined that portion, what the final outcome came is, we took out the debt service from that portion. When you have the county's current tax rate is 0.4648 per 100 valuation. Of that 0.4648, the debt service that the county pays on its current debt is just 0.778 cents per 100. So we will always get the base year plus whatever the debt service is. So it will never impact our debt service. If the debt service goes up, we get 100% of whatever that debt service component is. Then, from the remaining, in this instance, about 41 cents per 100, they will get 90% of that. So we again get 10% of, again, the increase. So we get 100% of the base year, 100% of the debt service, 10% of the increase. And of course, the base is 100% of both the debt service and the other, which we call maintenance and operations in the budget. One of the other interesting things about this deal is this property currently pays 0 taxes. It's totally exempt. As a result of this agreement, January 1, it will be valued at a minimum of $27.9 million, which will result in $130,000 in taxes to Montgomery County solely because of that stipulated value next year. Now, what I call the important features of the agreement? The developer has the risk, they pay all the actual cost up front. Somebody said, well, Montgomery County's gonna hand over $20 million to this developer. They will never hand over a check for $20 million. The developer has to put whatever the actual cost is in, plus his own financing, and then if, as, and when the taxes increase on just that 2,000 acres, they will be repaid it back based upon this formula. And we set the formula out in the agreement. Another very major component of this agreement that probably is not in any other development agreement of this type anywhere in the state. Montgomery County will pay no interest on these funds to be reimbursed. The most Montgomery County will ever pay is the actual cost of construction, or $20 million, whichever is less, period. If it takes 30 years to repay that actual cost, we pay the same amount as if the taxes go up so much that we pay them off in 10 years. So that means if the development is slower, or if the projections are wrong, it really has no significant impact upon Montgomery County's payment because we're not paying interest on it. It's a strict actual cost reimbursement. Again, I don't think you're going to see that or have seen that in any of these other development agreements that are being used. If you're familiar with the TERS that's used in cities, tax increment reinvestment zones, they always provide for interest. And the difference is, just as if you buy a house, say you buy a house for $200,000. If you pay cash for that house, it's going to cost you $200,000. If you finance that house for 30 years, it's going to cost you $500,000. The same thing, except you take the interest out now, you're buying that house for $200,000, and you can take basically based upon your cash flow, as long as it is to pay for that, yet you're never paying interest. It's never going to cost you more than $200,000. That's very similar to this agreement. Not only is the cap is tied directly to the cost of building certain specific major roadways. Now I've got a map here. We had some computer issues and printer issues at the end of the day, but I can show you a map that identifies these major and minor thoroughfares. So they're tied directly to the cost of those specific improvements. The burden of the tax increment payment, all these payments are going to come from the increment on just that 2,083 acres, not on any property in the woodlands, not on any other property in Conroe. It's just this development, the tax increment off that. The county will have no direct service cost. And what I mean by that is, it's part of the City of Conroe. They've already annexed it. So they're providing the police, they're providing the fire, they're providing all those services. Yeah, you heard, we have the Montgomery County has 80 sheriff's deputies here in the woodlands. The county is not going to have to provide any law enforcement for this 2,000 acres. Yet, we're getting the increased tax revenue. And some people will say, well, it's in the city, why should the county be involved in it? Well, it's part of the county too. The projected net tax revenue for the first 9 years, this is after, without regard to the increment that we're giving them, is $5.6 million over the first 9 years. That will, if their projections are correct, then the cost will be reimbursed, and beginning the 10th year, we'll get all 100% of the taxes, which is about $5 million a year based on their projections. Now again, that's their projections. That could change. It could be low, it could be high. With the county paying no interest on this reimbursement, it really is a negligible effect as to how long it takes. But that's the projections, that even while we're paying off this obligation, we'll get $5.6 million in taxes over the first 9 years. And after that, it's just under $5 million a year. Some other ones. We have an ability to prepay this obligation. Why would we want to? just because we want to build in the flexibility. We don't know what other financing options may be around there. And also there's, if you look two down, it says limited or no ability to grant tax abatements or other incentives. They may decide that it's important to grant for some reason, grant a tax abatement to get an office building built here. They have the ability, the flexibility to go and take that obligation, refinance it some other way, and then they can do a tax abatement. But because of the tax increment, there's practically no ability to grant any additional tax incentives or tax abatement. Important feature, no obligation to reimburse the money unless the infrastructure is in place. It does not directly affect the county's borrowing ability. It's not a debt. Doesn't count against their bonds, their bonded debt. Like I said, it's an estimated 9-year payoff. And one thing that J.R. Moore, tax assessor, points out, as pointed out in Commissioner's Court, this provides additional tax revenue to other taxing authorities, such as the hospital district, the school district. They're not part of this agreement. They're not giving up any of their increase in the taxes. So as this increases, it will help keep their tax rates at the same or lower because of the economic incentive that the City of Conroe and Montgomery County has brought to this development. That's an overview of it, and I know devil's in the details, and that's one thing we look at when we see these agreements. And by the way, there aren't very many of these agreements that have been done in Texas. This chapter 381 is fairly new. Counties in the past have been very limited in what they can do with economic incentives, basically tax abatements. And oftentimes those or TERS in connection with cities. But Montgomery County is a rather strange county that we have a lot of density and a lot of population in unincorporated areas of the county. Our largest municipality is City of Conroe. So we actually, without this type of agreement, are arguably, and I'll leave that for the politicians to argue, arguably at an economic disadvantage in attracting business and development. And that's why Chapter 381 was passed and enhanced to give the counties more flexibility. And actually what it's done is because we were losing it to other states, not necessarily to the cities. So that's kind of an overview of it. I know you may have some questions. I'll be happy to try and answer them. Yes, sir.
Why not sell it outright?
Sell what outright? Well, Boy Scouts did. They sold it to Johnson Development. Then Johnson's one turned it into subdivisions and offices and retail and recreation areas and things such as that.
What do they need to?
Because their infrastructure costs are $40 million than what they can use for mud. And let me digress. When you have, originally when people would develop a subdivision, the man would buy the land, go out and lay the streets, build the streets. He would recoup those street costs in the lot price. They would sell to people or builders, things such as that. Well, as costs increase, especially cost of water and sewer, as opposed to septic, that got somewhat prohibited. So people would move outside of the municipalities where they weren't required to have water and sewer. They formed their own private water corporation, put people on septic tanks, and sell lots that way. Well, then if cities needed to expand, they'd have to come in and put in water and sewer. So kind of as an accommodation, both to help development and not basically have the cities have to come in and redo it, they developed MUDs. The initial MUDs came in and for just that subdivision would issue bonds to pay back the developer for the water and sewer. It worked out so well that a few years later, one good thing deserves another. Let's give the MUDs road powers to build roads. At one time they didn't. That's why you had some RUDs. You saw road utility districts. Well, you don't see those anymore because MUDs have those road powers. So now the developers are getting paid back by the people who buy the property ultimately and live there and pay the taxes. They pay basically for the infrastructure in their subdivisions. And the bigger the subdivision, the more the infrastructure. And the MUDs, in this instance, the municipal management district, is limited to the amount of bonds they can issue based upon the size and projection. And this one, they could only borrow $75 million. But their projected infrastructure cost, partly because the site is $40 million more than that. So that's why they came to us and asked the county to pick up potentially $20 million in these particular roads, because otherwise they wouldn't do the project. Yes, Bill?
Couple of questions. How many bidders were on this?
It wasn't a bidding process.
I thought it was sealed bids to the Boy Scouts.
Oh, I don't know.
Okay,
I
and
did
the
not.
question comes,
There probably were sealed bids to Boy Scouts, but I wasn't involved in that.
now my question comes that they put in a bid, and in figuring out your bid, you have to figure out how much you're gonna get from the CMM or whatever, that's 75 million. And then also, how much you're gonna get from Montgomery County Attorney.
much you would want to get, yes.
CMM is supposed to do it. And I'm curious why that wasn't part of the bid. In other words, that all the bidders had the advantage of the knowledge that this was going to happen relative to the $40 million, particularly from the county. The 75, I couldn't talk about. That's one part of it. The second part of it is, I mean, this thing raced through like a galloping horse. You go into court and all the rest of that. And I'll address that in court separately, that there should be, a period for public inspection and all the rest of that stuff before something like that ever runs through again. Of course, you open your mouth and you get blue, till you turn blue in the face, but they will say, thank you very much, please sit down. And I'm concerned about that whole process because there's lots of room for hanky-panky in that, and I don't particularly like it. The other thing is that another part of it was to do with the residue of the 1,400 acres. And that is the 700 and the 14.
Right.
And the 14 was talked about how wonderful this would be in the development of these park area for the people of Conroe. Now, when I watch developers work, they put in the golf course first, okay? Because it attracts people. Now, if we're laying out 20 million from the county or 40 million from Conroe, I think the developer has an obligation to develop recreational areas for the people of Conroe by a fixed date in parallel to developing the land, and I'm curious if that's part of the deal.
The City of Conroe's deal is different from Montgomery County.
Okay, the Montgomery County deal, keep it there.
Okay, Montgomery County deal has nothing to do with parks, nothing to do with wetlands remediation. It is identified solely to go to the actual cost of constructing certain specified roadways. Basically, these roads here,
Yeah,
the blue, these, the connectors. Conroe's 20 million is going towards recreational areas, wetlands mitigation, raising some of the property up. That's what their money is going to. Our money to be reimbursed is tied solely, again, to those roads and bridges.
no, I get all that. I'm going to the overall sale of this thing in these recreational areas, and I'm wondering when they're going in. It may be part of the Conroe deal, but I think that we also had an obligation here because it's for county residents, not for people of Conroe for a recreation area, it's county. It should be a county recreational area, and I think there should, you know, the horse is out the door, I know, but it's something that, and particularly when politicians are out spreading that we are doing all these wonderful things and creating recreation and all the rest of that stuff, and I will bet dollars to donuts that the recreation is backloaded. So, that's just me.
I haven't
Call me
seen
a
their,
cynic.
yeah, I haven't seen their actual development plan. To go further at a couple of your other questions. One, it was put together rather quickly. Something that we normally would have had about 3 months to work on, we had about 2 weeks, 3 weeks. No one wished we'd had more time to work on it more than me. There were a number of factors that went into that, mostly dealing with Johnson Development's contract with the Boy Scouts. They had a date, which initially was October 28th, excuse me, October 30th, and then subsequently extended 1 week into about November 4th, by which their feasibility period ended, which meant they could back out of this contract and not buy it if they couldn't get their financing or other avenues in place, such as these development agreements with Conroe and with Montgomery County. You know, and so that was part of the driving force for the time frame. The Boy Scouts would not extend it more than the 1 week. Now, why they waited, well, I know why they waited to get it to the county before, because they were working primarily with the city, and there was some indication, they'd been given some indication that the county would do basically the same thing the city did. Well, I can tell you we did not do the same thing the city did. It is quite different. The city is paying interest. The city is floating their own, is the cost of issuance of any bonds, whether they do it or not. The city actually is laying off part of it onto the Conroe Industrial Development Corporation. We're going to get $10 million from that city-controlled entity. City's giving up some sales tax, which of course we don't have the ability to do. So it is quite different. In the long run, the county's cost is going to be a fraction of what the city's out-of-pocket cost is, or the city's cost and lack of reimbursement cost, total reimbursement cost. So there was a lot that went on in 2 weeks, I can assure you. I can also assure you there was no backdoor deals. We didn't have anybody.
I don't, my problem is other bidders not having the advantage of this.
Well, they did have the advantage of this. They could have calculated this in their own bid or proposal. Now, I will tell you, it's touch and go whether this agreement ever got put together. So, other bidders may not have felt that they had sufficient ability to bring this to the table. What went into their bids, I don't know. What went into Johnson's bid, I don't know. But it was a free market transaction. These types of transactions where this tax increment financing, TERS, things such as that, are often called public-private finance or public-private partnerships.
Yeah.
And they're fairly new and they're evolving. So if I were advising another bidder and they said, well, think we can get 40 million from city and county? I go, I don't know. Yeah. County's never done one before. City had not done one exactly like this before. So we were breaking new ground on it, and so it was anybody's best guess as to whether it would come together or not.
This whole thing is premised on the assumption that the mud can't borrow more than a certain amount.
Essentially, yes.
And so the whole rationale is that you got this borrowing. That borrowing limit is driven by the rates the mud charges. Mud's can charge anything they want. So what sort of due diligence went into on the county's part, because of verifying that assumption? And why couldn't they just raise their rates and cover their debt service?
We did not put any actuarial or financial investigation into the MUD's borrowing capability. We looked at it from what we were asked to do from the county. So as far as due diligence, we were looking at it solely from what the county's obligations, potential risk, and reward was. Going aside, yeah, theoretically MUD can raise the rates, whatever, but there's a limit as to what their rates can withstand and what the bonds can be issued for based upon the size of the development and projections they're on. And they also cannot do it until they actually get it on the ground about 1.5 years after some things are completed. So it will be a rollout phase. So this was an estimate, best estimates of everybody involved. There's no hard and fast, I'm gonna say that's a drop dead number, 75, but that's the best estimate. And we relied upon the information that we were given. We did not independently verify it. Because again, in some respects, especially the way it came out, it doesn't really change the county's obligation. The county's obligation is fixed, and it's tied again to specific construction projects, which, if you look at the map, actually will have a benefit for the county, at least in my opinion. It's going to be a major connector basically from Loop 336 to 45. There's a major connector there. So I can, the calculation of how much a MUD can borrow, there are a lot of factors that go into it. A lot of them are business factors and projections as to what the bonds will sell for and how much it can actually issue. And especially when we have a MUD who has no track record.
Well, yeah, I mean, Woodland was developed without any county subsidy.
It's developed $50 million worth of HUD money. The Woodlands was started under a HUD program, which the federal government gave $50 million for infrastructure. So that's how the Woodlands got started. And no, the county has been limited in the past. They couldn't do things like this. And I'm not here to say it's a good or a bad thing. I'm here to explain what the deal is, because there has been a lot of misconceptions what the deal really was. And I'm not going to say whether it's good or bad. I may have my opinion, but I'm not going to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that that's not the role of the county attorney to say good deal, bad deal. But what we heard was a lot of misinformation about what the deal was. And when you open up the paper and it's the Montgomery County gives $20 million to Johnson Development, that's not the deal. That needs to be fixed. When you hear, hey, everything is rainbows and stars and we have independently verified and this didn't, we had months and months to look at that deal. That didn't happen either. And so I think BD is here and I'm here and JD, our role is really, we're not policymakers. That is up to our elected officials up there on Commissioners Court to decide. I think it would be completely appropriate for the commissioners to say, you know what, that is not an appropriate role for government. We shouldn't be involved in this transaction at all. And so, no. And it's also a completely, I guess, legitimate stance to take for some people to say, based on this promotes, an increased tax basis, and it is an appropriate role for government to spawn economic development. And so that's really their decision. All we wanted to do was come and say, this is what the deal is, and answer questions about what it was, because there was so much misinformation, and probably a lot of that dealt with the time frame. All of a sudden you have this notice, and here's Johnson Development, and here's a room full of lawyers at Commissioner's Court, and here we go.
And clearly, again, this is the first one, may end up being the only one that Montgomery County ever does. I will tell you, I think someone had asked about it. We have formed a committee, and we are in the process, it's already met, we're in the process of promulgating kind of initial guidelines and gatekeeping things with regard to these new type of entities. And the tax assessor J.R. Moore is on the committee. A couple of commissioners are on the committee, the county auditor is on the committee, the county engineer is on the committee, and I'm on the committee. So it is a new thing for Montgomery County, it's a new thing for both counties in the state of Texas. It has its benefits, it has disadvantages.
Yeah, I want to comment on the economic development aspects of this. Because in doing this in all this way, you forego essentially your ability to tax abatement for future economic entities that want to move in there. The things that we give to Chicago Bridge and Irons, the people that actually bring the jobs in economic development areas. But now, they're going to be competing against other entities who have the ability to give tax abatement, which they no longer have. And so essentially it becomes a real estate deal for the sale of the houses and the building of buildings which will be occupied or not occupied by people who, or land, commercial land that people want to build on, with the inability to get tax abatements against other towns which can. And I just, at any rate, this is the stuff I'll talk about.
Well, as I pointed out,
It's an
that
important,
is
it's
an
an important
important
aspect.
aspect of this, and, may very well be viewed as a disadvantage.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to point out, one reason we put in a ability that we're not tied to paying it off in this manner. We can, if there's some other ability to do it, we can basically prepay it or pay it off early to take advantage if there is a tax abatement we want to do, and they decide, well, it's worth it. And again, that's a policy decision. It's worth it to go ahead and pay this off 3 years early in order to give a tax abatement.
Yeah.
The projected development on this is not going to be, it'll be a slow start to it because of all the infrastructure work and all the wetlands and all the low areas there. So in the first few years, they wouldn't be able to give tax abatements anyway, because no one's going to go there until the infrastructure's in place.
Is there any room in that, if for some reason, due to whatever efforts they're doing, that the 1,300 acres becomes usable for homes, etc., that they would also be required to pay on that difference?
Yes, because it encompasses all 2,083
Okay.
acres, regardless of what they're using it for.
Okay.
So yes, and the other important part is the increase is just on the taxes on that 2,083 acres, whatever it becomes. It doesn't go across the street, you still get 100% of those taxes. You still get 100% of Stewart's Forest, which is across the street, so. Yes,
Well, hey, I'm gonna give you an opportunity to brag on your office. Did you or did you not do a good job in negotiating this thing? And did you do it, and who handled it from the city? The city attorney?
primarily the city attorney for the city.
All right, I cleaned a little bit that you, of course, did the city attorney do as good a job as you did with the county? Like, go ahead and so let them have it. That coming idea, this is the Tea Party.
The city had different
Objectives.
focuses. They also had different resources. Like I said, they have planned on using $10 million of CDIC, of their
Yeah.
20 million. They have sales tax. They were looking a lot at the retail component of this and expecting retail to come in, which generates a lot of sales tax. And so the city was more concerned with the sales tax aspect of it, getting
Right.
retail in there, than of course the county is. The county was concerned about the tax increment. So they're almost apples and oranges, even though they started out very similar, they're almost apples and oranges. Yeah, I think our office did a wonderful job on it, especially considering the short time frame. Like I said, we basically had it for 2 weeks, and they made major concessions from their very first proposal. In fact, let me just tell you, the initial proposal that contained interest even though it was a limited amount of interest, that was a $52 million difference.
52 million?
52 million over the course of it. It would pay off over 30 years, $52 million difference, by not having that interest component in it.
Yeah, that's,
Just over our $20 million?
Yes, that's the example of the house. See, we have no, but based upon the projections of the development, the projected, and again, these are projections, it's hard to project 20, 30 years down the line, but projections and based upon the cost, the interest that the bonds would be on, that we'd be repaying, it turned out to be about $50 million difference. So that in and of itself was a sizable savings, I would say. Not to mention the ability to prepay, that gives us the right to go back in and make determination of whether, it's worth it to pay this off, to have some other tax incentives, or to take advantage of any additional financing ability to go down the line, that the legislature may create down the line. Had a lot of help on it, basically our real property department did most of it, but involved other people in it. Amy is one, and so it took a lot of work.
well,
Let me give a shout out.
yeah,
Your commissioners
yeah,
and the county judge, we had several meetings with them. They were staunch in some of their objections to the original proposal. And I think if I might say, I think we squeezed Johnson as much as we're gonna squeeze Johnson. I think anything more, they would have walked away. Now, you can decide whether that's a good or a bad thing. I'm just saying, I think we got the best deal that we were going to get and still get the development done. And by Johnson. And that's part of the policymakers' determination that the type of developments that Johnson Development does, Sienna Plantation, Wood Forest, things like that, are developments we'd like to see in this area as opposed to piecemeal development or mobile home development on this part. And there's nothing wrong with mobile homes, but they don't increase your tax base a lot. And frankly, it's probably a big component for the city to annex it, which again relieves the county of those direct service requirements. So there were a lot of components, a lot of people who worked on it. But I'd say, I think our office did a very good job on it with regard to representing the county
well, I'm
and
just gonna
limiting its
follow
exposure.
up. I gotta follow up, because I was impressed with you before you, I knew you in that other case, and you really had a conscience to you. And I won't get into it, but I guarantee you had a conscience about another case where another lawyer had screwed anyway. But I want to tell you, I want to ask you, is this attributable, this good deal, no interest and all that, attributed to you because you're the finest real estate lawyer in the whole damn thing? Because J.D. Lambright has the most political power. He's the most powerhouse guy that you've ever seen politically. Now give me the answer to
I
that.
think it all boils down to JD.
No, really, it's bringing people on board like BD and like
Yeah.
Amy. Unfortunately, these things are getting dumped. This isn't the only one. Amy's getting a load of things dumped in her lap from the auditor.
Yeah,
But like while we're burning the midnight oil to do these things, and BD shortchanging himself, the time and effort he spent, and I don't think you're gonna find a finer real estate lawyer that knows it for 30 years, as he said, double board certified, and is in there getting the best deal we can. We don't get to decide whether you do the deal or not, but we're trying to make sure Commissioners Court is educated and understands the deal, and I think historically, they weren't understanding what some of these deals are. And that's the reason we're out here like this, make sure, you may like the deal, you may not, but at least understand it, and we're trying to do that with Commissioners Court, so they go in with their eyes open, and then it's up to you guys to get the right people on the court there.
My favorite expression since January 1 is, I don't make policy, I advise and I implement.
Is there a way based upon the size of the deal to give you, to compel the commissioners to bring it to you with a certain time frame? In other words, so that you don't get jammed like we got jammed. to the extent that a deal of this size would require, well, for instance, 60 days. But grab a number, but you just can't do, the way this whole thing went down, especially coming off of Joe Corley, I mean, the bells were going off like crazy.
Yes, and we've already started that process by the formation of this committee that's going to be looking at these as they come through before commissioners ever even see them. Frankly, I've got another one on my desk right now that we've actually been working on for about 4 months. Actually predated this one. And it's gone through several changes, and it's completely unlike this one. It's about as unlike this one as it can be. And that's what's the challenge for these types of issues and agreements is because they are going to be so project specific. And each project will have its pros and its cons, but also the, how you analyze it may be different from each project. But we are attempting, and we've already identified in even the first or second meeting of this committee, certain kind of bellwether or gates that we have before we even really consider it, so that you don't get your good buddy deals. Well, he's good buddies, we need to do this deal. That's not going to be, I don't believe that'll be the case, because we will have specific criteria that our committee looks at, and then we look at each deal, so. I expect in the future we'll have a lot more time than this.
Okay, so, that's right.
Yeah.
Let's, thank you.